Hello, welcome to A Lesson Before Writing, episode 23. I'm Ted Morrissey, and I'm here with my co hosts, Brady Harrison and Grant Tracy. We're just kind of fumbling around here. Brady was having technical difficulties. I had to change venues at the last minute, but we're going to persevere. I'll mention that this is Brady's most recent release by us, The Term Between, winner of the High Plains Book Award. Because I had to change venues to the library, I grabbed the library copy, a library issue of your book. And then also Grant, we got his most recent release, Neon Kiss. This is the paperback edition, but also the library edition. And it has a preview of the new Hayden Fuller mystery, A Shoeshine Kill, which I've had the proof of for quite a while, and I think one of the things we want to talk about is kind of where we are in that, because you and I made some decisions about that, which is delaying its release, but I think those are good decisions. And then Brady hasn't even seen it yet, but I've got the proof of A Journey to Al Ramel, and it's looking pretty sweet, let me tell you. Brady it's an adventure story, set in the early part of the 20th century about the main character goes from Paris to Morocco, Al Ramel, and Brady's idea, and actually I had thought similarly that he wanted the book to look like a leather-bound journal. Given my lack of Photoshop skills, it required a bit of ingenuity, but I think it's turned out pretty cool. And one of the things I like, I'm leaving just the bare binding on the spine and not putting like the title and the author and the press on it. And I think that's probably cool with Brady. If not, you can let me know. But I love the look of it so much. I don't want to muck it up with with a bunch of words. So anyway, it's looking really good. I'm kind of giving it a final proofreading. The only thing really I'm finding is, as followers of our podcast will know, it was highly experimental at one point, and because a lot of the experimental stuff on the page was just unworkable in the format of the book, we had to really tone that part of it down. And so this book has been through like 3 or 4 different major iterations, and there's just a few little typo remnants here and there where they didn't quite get transferred over from one version to the next. It's kind of hard to explain, but so it's nothing major. It's just that there's a lot of them kind of peppered throughout, and I don't want to miss any of them. So I'm going through it pretty carefully. But anyway, a couple of great books. I'm super excited about getting them released as soon as we can. So there is that. I will mention my most recent book is Strophes of Job. This is the hardcover edition. It's out in paperback as well. I wanted to check in with you guys on kind of what you're doing. I've got some reports of things I'm up to, but I don't want to dominate the time too much right now. I'll get back to those. But I do want to mention, before I forget, a podcast alumnus, Matthew Goldberg. His was the featured story of episode 14, Night Watch. He let me know that the story collection, which has Night Watch as the title story, has been released. And actually, he let me know right before the last episode, and I was going to mention it and forgot to mention it. So I wanted to make sure I did it this time. I haven't looked at the whole collection, but that story, we all were gaga over it, Night Watch. So go to MatthewGoldberg.com, and that's Matthew with 1 T. There's another author with the same name, Matthew with 2 T's, but this is the Matthew with 1 T. But Matthew Goldberg, Night Watch, newly released collection of stories. So very, very cool. All right, I'm going to stop yammering for a minute here. Grant, I wanted to check on the progress of your film.
Yeah, I'm halfway through filming. So, and it's going great. We average about 4 to 5 pages a day, which is pretty quick. Usually in Hollywood, it's about a page to a page and a half a day, 2 pages on a good day. So, but the actors were in the staged reading version of it, and they know the material. They've learned their lines. We've had table reads, and so we're ready to roll, and it's going great. I mean, it's a DIY dollar store general production. I mean, I'm filming with my phone.
Dollar store.
Yeah, it's like F3 recorder. I do what I can. but to me, it goes back to my love for punk rock. Just do the damn thing. Here's a chord, here's another chord. Now form a band, and so that's kind of my mentality. So anyway, it's going great. The actors are really digging in, and we we filmed 4 pages yesterday, and then on Thursday we film a big chunk, and I've got 4 more shooting days left, and it's going to be like a B monogram kind of film, about 60 minutes, 55 to 60 minutes. And now the next step is trying to find I'm gonna see if my former guitar teacher might do sound for me. I've got an original song that I wrote that I want to play over the opening and closing credits, and then I need some blues licks throughout. So some leitmotifs, and he would be ideal to do that on an acoustic guitar. So I'm gonna reach out to him and see if we can arrange something. That would be
So
awesome.
is the title completely settled? If you tell us the title, will that be the
Yeah,
title
but
that's released
it's
on?
called By the Stars of St. Matthew, and it's about a Mennonite woman who is a veterinarian. It's set in 1937, and a gangster shows up. There's a little chapel behind the house, and he shows up in the chapel wounded, and she takes care of him, and eventually they both pull things out of each other. Her husband was a World War I veteran and died from being exposed to mustard gas, and uh, she's lonely, intelligent, and sees something in this guy, and he sees something in her, and so it becomes kind of a love story, but I don't want to reduce it to that. I mean, it's more than that. It's yeah. So anyway, I think it's I think it's really good. So I'll let you guys see it when we get it all edited, which I hope is by the end of the summer, and then I'll enter it.
So is your plan to just have it released via the internet, or are you going to enter it in some film
I'm going to enter it in some
festivals?
film festivals in Iowa and around the Midwest, and it's got it's all Iowa actors, and but it's set in Canada. It's set in rural Canada, like outside of Toronto, Richmond Hill area, before Richmond Hill became Richmond Hill. With Richmond Hill's just like any other urban sprawl now. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I told you guys this before, but we drove through it about 3 years ago, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? I remember it from being a kid, and it was like cottage country. It was gorgeous, and now it's just like every other. It's like going through Markham or Pickering or Ajax or Port Hope, or they're all the same. So anyway, yeah, that's the idea, and it was very much influenced by Morley Callahan's More Joy in Heaven, and uh, The Dark Past, a film noir, kind of an underrated film, underappreciated film noir with William Holden as a gangster who hangs out in a psychiatrist's house, and so I kind of took that idea of like a therapist talking to this gangster, but actually who is the therapist, and so they both help each other. Whereas in the William Holden film, Lee J. Cobb's always in this superior position of being the one with all the knowledge and solving the puzzle of what's wrong with William Holden's character. And this is much different. So I'm excited for it. But yeah, I'll definitely send you guys the MP4 when it gets done. And then, yeah, we're going to probably do a debut at the Hearst Center for the Arts here in town, and then enter it in a variety of festivals and just see what happens.
Now, I don't know if you're aware, but we have the Route 66 Film Festival is here in Springfield, Illinois, and
Oh,
it's a
wow.
really good. You got to check that out. And if you
Yeah.
happen to do that and want to come to Springfield, maybe we could do double duty and
Oh, I
arrange
would
a
love,
reading.
I
And
love Springfield. It's a great place. The great bookstore. At least when I remember, there used to be. Well, my sister-in-law used to do an art fair, and right around the art fair there was and they had hardwood floors and
yeah,
just
Prairie Archives. Yeah.
yeah, what a cool bookstore that was.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. All right, well, great. That all sounds fantastic, and we'll obviously keep an eye out for all that happening. Brady, you're I guess you're kind of footloose and fancy free. You're done teaching for the semester and don't have any administrative duties this summer. And do you have any other big plans, especially writing related, or what's going on?
don't say a word about anything administrative. don't
So,
don't don't
I'll edit that out of the recording.
don't upset the fates. Grant, congratulations on making such great progress, and I love the fact that you wrote a song for it. I love everything completely about the DIY aesthetic, as you know, and so very punk of you. So really look forward to seeing it, and then congratulations to Matthew on the collection. As we know, that's always a good moment. It's such a great feeling. So Ted, since you asked, I have been hard at work. I've been working on a new novel. I have it mapped out, been writing parts of it. And some while ago, I wrote, you remember, and Grant will know this too, that I wrote a story in conversation with Hills Like White Elephants, the Hemingway classic. And then, rather against my will, because I'm working on this novel, I started having all these ideas for all these other stories in conversation with some of Hemingway's stories and events in his life. And for some reason, so Ted, brace yourself. We might be talking to you about a completed manuscript by the end of the summer. Who knows? But at the current pace, and yeah, it's been so much fun. This is just for fun. These stories. I mean, the stories are serious, and I want them to be standalone stories that are on their own terms, that one could read and hopefully find a great story or a good story. But that in conversation with Hemingway, then there's that much more. And so I wonder, I'll wind this up, Ted, but I've been thinking about your work on Melville and your work on Poe and on Mary Shelley. And so I'm wondering if there's an emergent or already long-standing 12 Winters press, the 12 Winters ethos, the 12 Winters, this idea of conversation pieces. So I've been delighted with this, and it's been so much fun. Okay, the last thing I'll say about this, I tripped across in the Nick Adams stories a fragment, "The Last Good Country," and the story just stops, and it's fascinating. It's very strange. It's a weird story, and I wrote 2 replies to it, but of course it's still in copyright, so I can't include those. So I mean, the whole thing's been fun. Yeah, just for fun.
Now we could ask for permission to use those, even though they're copyrighted. So that could be kind of a pain in the neck. But on the other hand, it doesn't have to be, and so you don't necessarily have to rule it out completely. I'm glad you're thinking along those lines. One of the reasons I mean I do a lot of revisionist stuff and cite things, but I always just make sure that it's beyond copyright, just because I don't want to mess with all that stuff. But that sounds very cool. That sounds very cool. As you guys know, revisionist work is something I'm particularly interested in. I teach a couple of courses in revisionist work in the MFA program. So Brady mentioned my Mary Shelley project. I like to write sonnets, and I hadn't written any for a couple of years. And so around Christmas time, I thought, you know what, I'd like to just write a handful of sonnets, just to, kind of have something to send around and blah, blah. And so, I don't know, over the course of a couple of weeks, I decided, maybe I'll have them kind of be literary based. And then I thought, well, I'll do something like, first of all, I thought maybe sonnets to William Gass, my idol, who normally is sitting on my shoulder if I were home. He's still here symbolically, like a parrot. But anyway, as you guys know too, I've been fascinated with Mary Shelley for years and years and years, and a couple of my novels are based on her, including one's a sequel to Frankenstein. And so anyway, I thought, well, I'll write 3 or 4 or 5 sonnets to Mary Shelley, just in apostrophe, right? So I did, and I really enjoyed it. This was like the beginning of January. So then I thought, well, you know what? I'll write a few more. So then I had like 10, and then pretty soon I had 20, writing basically one a day. And I thought, well, if I have 20, I'm kind of in chapbook territory now, but I really need 30 or 40 for a chapbook. So then I decided, and then suddenly, like, I've got, and if I keep going, I'll have enough for a whole collection. So anyway, I'm up to 93 Mary Shelley poems. I thought I was done at 90, and was planning to be done. And then they just keep bubbling up in my gray matter, these topics. And so each sonnet is sort of a little standalone, obviously. So my title, I think, is going to be Mary W. Shelley, a biography in sonnets, and several of them have been picked up already, and they've started to be published. So that always makes you feel good. It's like I'm not just producing absolute garbage here. At least somebody out there thinks they're worth something. Anyway, that's what I've been working on. But then I think my sense of the overall collection is going to be chronological. I decided that I'm going to kind of bracket it between her birth, with some references to her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, thrown in for context. And then I'm going to stop with her coming. She was in Italy for a long time, and then she came back to England and attended one of the first performances of Frankenstein as a stage production, and loved it. And she really enjoyed it. And of course, she had no idea what that was portending for the future, right? And so I'm going to end with her attending, that performance and so forth. But it's just been a hoot. But it's very typical of me. Something's going to start off very simple, and then it just keeps growing and growing and growing into something else. I was going to actually kind of connect this, Grant, with what you're up to, because as a novelist, and I've done a couple short story collections, you got these big chunks of things. Obviously, you have to think about how to arrange them. But oftentimes, especially like in a novel, the arrangement kind of imposes itself on the form because you're basically following. But with this project, these sonnets are all like little snapshots of different moments in her life, or different connections between her life and something that may be going on, particularly in the novel Frankenstein, and how her life may have influenced that. And even though I kind of wrote them more or less in chronological sequence, that's not going to be the ideal order. So I've been struggling with how to fit these little sonnets together in a meaningful way. And I think it must be something like, at least, having a bunch of scenes in a movie and figuring out, well, how do you put them together for maximum effect and so forth. And that's something I've never really done before. Because like I say, novels kind of, suggest their own sort of structure, at least from the way I've written them. How are you dealing with that in film, and how, editing all these little scenes, and how do you figure out how to put them together, and what's that process like?
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's interesting because how to explain this. Obviously, like if I set the camera up for a shot, let's say of Brady, and then I'm going to go into shot reverse shot mode. I might just keep, because we only use one camera, I'll keep the camera on Brady and run that scene the whole time, and just film Brady. And then I'll flip it and film Rebecca, who's my lead actress, and do the scene again. And then I might go to a two shot and do it again. And then I've got these three types of shots, and then I can figure out which ones work best when I start editing, and where to, but then there's other tricky things, like if somebody leaves the frame, then I feel like I'm not going to have a good match cut with what followed. So then what I'll do is I'll maybe do a cutaway shot of another actor. So let's say Brady again, and then back to Becca as she's doing something else, because she moves out of the frame, but I want to show what she's doing. And I just don't have the technology or the continuity person to help me with that. So I do little tricks like that to cover, changes in the proxemic range of the actors as they move. So that's something. And then there's times where I just will say, let's film you opening this package, and I'll use it however I want. So there's a scene where she's opening up medical supplies, and the medical supplies figure in on how they beat the gangsters at the end of the movie. And so I kind of wanted to linger on that. And so we just filmed it like really long, and I'm not going to use all the footage, but I know I can edit and I can insert it and use it later. So it's just a lot of tricks like that. And then in my head, I want to do all this stuff with triangular compositions because I've read, in theater books and stuff, triangles and diagonal lines are interesting. And I because the space I'm in and the story set in 1937, it's like, oh God damn it, there's a wall switch over there, light switch. I can't show that. So that limits where I can move the camera over there. And the greenery is coming through the goddamn window. And this is supposed to be winter. So I can't film from this side. And then it's like, so there's all kinds of little things like that limit um what I want to do. But I did discover a visual plan, which I didn't have at the beginning. And the visual plan is early in the film, I use a lot of shot, reverse shot, and decoupage, as the French would say. But later, as the couple's coming together and enjoying each other's presence and playing cards, I go to a 5 minute long take. A little Jim Jarmusch, little Orson Welles. And I'm very proud of that because that's the moment where the characters are really enjoying each other's company. And because she's a painter as well as a veterinarian, I wanted to have a tableau effect. So it's like a stillness for like 5 solid minutes. And that was, I didn't start. That's why I don't storyboard, because I would have had that from the beginning. I kind of roughly storyboard, but I keep myself open to the process. And so I came up with that yesterday. I said, you know what, guys, scene 3, we're going to start with a long take sequence, 5 pages we're going to shoot. So learn your lines, because I'm not going to cut between you. We're going to play cards and just, you can ad lib some lines, but that's what I want to do. And they're like, cool. So anyway, that was exciting for me to discover a visual design. And I guess I was thinking like Sidney Lumet, because when he came from theater, and so he often, like when he was making The Verdict, and I read his book on directing, and he talked about how he had a visual plan, like certain scenes he wanted filmed in blue, scenes about the past he wanted auburn colors. And so if you rewatch The Verdict, you'll see Frank Galvin in certain scenes filmed more in an orange light, and then other scenes in kind of that blue light. And that's all part of, that's his theater training with lighting. And so I started thinking, well, let's take that idea and have a visual plan for this movie. And so something emerged. So it's trial and error, I guess. And I didn't over determine it. I let it grow naturally out of the process. But yeah, that's some of the tricks I've learned, with editing of the film, and pretty excited. I hope
Cool.
people notice that there is a visual plan behind what I'm doing. It's not just, okay, let's do this next. Let's do this next. So anyway.
Right. Well, that sounds great. Yeah, like I said, I always tell my students not to lose any sleep over the final sequencing, because there is no perfect sequence. And so I have to kind of keep reminding myself of that too, that, obviously I want to find a sequence that I think works pretty well, but recognizing the fact that, every combination, you're going to lose something here or there, but hopefully
Right.
the gains will be greater. Yeah. Brady, have you had any experience along those lines of that kind of rearranging a material, or do you have any thoughts on anything Grant just said there?
Oh, well, I love Grant's working strategies. And I think over the course of our podcast that Grant has talked about, and Ted, you've also talked about allowing yourself some freedom, that you have to discover things on the ground, and you can't be too set. And so you can't have a storyboard for everything. You have to see what the material wants and what you can do. So I will say, just as a in direct response, that in A Journey to El Ramal, because there's so many different parts, when is the appropriate moment to suspend, in effect, the main narrative, and to introduce these other narratives into it, and how to cut back and forth. And so that was, I always thought that was really fun. I enjoyed all of that immensely. So nothing as elaborate or as complex as what Grant's describing, but yeah, certainly wrestled with the order of material and hoping for certain kinds of effects, or the right effects, or the best effects. And yeah, we'll see how people respond.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've really been enjoying it, and I just want to make sure we kind of sift out all these, the little typos, not change it. One of the big things that happened was like there's 3 different kinds of dashes in the world. There's M dashes and N dashes, and then 2 hyphens and a row dashes. And you've got every variety. You've got a buffet of dashes in the. And I tried to work those out as we were laying it out, but like I said, we had bigger fish to fry. So that's mainly what I'm finding, because I want to consistently have the M dash, and not have a variety of dashes. It sounds like a really minor point, but to me, it's important for the overall aesthetic of the work to be consistent and that kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to mention this podcast before I forget to. I mentioned last time I had kind of a major project I've been working on. I've developed, much to my pleasure and honor, a kind of working relationship with the National University of Modern Languages in Islamabad, Pakistan. And I've done a couple of remote lectures for that university and so forth. Well, one of the professors there, Amina Ghazanfar, she had her students in a literary theory class read my story Vox Humana. It was available online. U.S. books are not easily available in Pakistan, but luckily, quite a bit of my stuff is online. And so they found this story Vox Humana, which was published, I think, in 2018 originally online, the Blue Lake Review. And anyway, she had her students read it and do a psychoanalytic critique of it. And then just for fun, her students started sending me their critiques. And I was just blown away with how good they were. It's like, oh my God, here are these they're all undergraduates. They're undergraduates and they're working in a language which is not their native language, but yet they're obviously very fluent in English. And they're just, it's like, my gosh, I didn't realize I wrote such a great story. They're finding all kinds of stuff going on that I had no conscious idea of, but they've convinced me, yeah, it definitely is at work in the story. So anyway, after reading several of these, Amina and I decided that it would be cool to do a casebook. So we've released via 12winters.com in the miscellany, Vox Humana, a casebook, which has, I think, 19 of the students' essays on the story, psychoanalytic critiques, but they get into feminist critique and Jungian critique and, all kinds of very sophisticated stuff. And then I wrote some things for the casebook as well. I went back to my original drafts in my notebooks that I was writing in, and I've transcribed those, and those are available just so people, if they might be interested in seeing what the story began as, which was very different from what it turned out to be. But you can kind of see little seeds of what it came into being. And then our 12 Winters friends, Aswin Pranseth and Augustine George, they're professors in India, and they had interviewed me for and the interview appeared in the paperback edition of Delta of Cassiopeia. And so I got their permission to use an excerpt of that. So there's an interview there from these professors in India who had read like everything I'd ever written and asked, and I've been doing this for a long time, and asked some really in-depth questions about some of my earliest work, including in some of my most recent work. So anyway, I'm just tickled pink that anyone has been paying this much attention to my writing, and that we were able to get this casebook and highlight these different students' work because they just did a wonderful job, and I've been promoting it via social media. It's actually kind of been ready for a couple of months, but they're actually translating Vox Humana into Urdu, the main language of Pakistan. And we were waiting for that translation to be complete, and we're going to include that on the casebook. But then the translator ran into some personal difficulties, and unfortunately, as we know, Pakistan and India have been having military conflict, and so that I think that entered into the scene a little bit. So anyway, the translation is not done, but we'll add that. It's the wonderful world of online publishing. We'll add the translation, when it's available, and they've asked permission to translate other works of mine, and then the plan is to publish them through the National University of Modern Languages Press. So that's all just super exciting. And anyway, thanks to the professor, Dr. Ghazanfar and her students and National University of Modern Languages in Pakistan. And anyway, it's just been very, very fun for me to work with the students and work on this project. So check it out. Not for my reason, but to read the work of these students who did such an amazing job. So Anyway, want to throw that out there. I know, Brady, you've been kind of seeing some of that stuff pop up on social media because you're still on Facebook and Instagram somewhat and so forth. So I know you've been a little bit aware of what's going on.
Yeah, no, it looks great, and I haven't read the complete essays yet, but the excerpts. Isn't it funny? And to hear you say so, Ted, that reading is a different activity than writing, and little do we know what connections and what images and what language does. What a great thing, and it's so cool to be working with students literally all over the globe.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And being a typical American monoglot, where I feel like I've done something pretty special if I read off the Taco Bell menu and pronounce most of the words correctly, to have these people who are working in a non-native language, and just doing amazing, amazing stuff. So anyway, it just has been very, very cool, and yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the plan of releasing different work in Urdu and how and where that might. I guess that's the 9th most spoken language in the world. I mean, throughout the Middle East and Africa and so forth. And so, maybe my words will get into some ears that they might not otherwise. So that's been very interesting and kind of exciting and so forth. Not to compare myself to Edgar Allan Poe, but we all know that that Poe didn't have nearly as much of a serious American following until the French discovered Poe and and started translating his work, and then that kind of fed back into the U.S. in terms of interest in Poe. So, who knows where international interest can eventually lead or whatever. Yeah. Well, speaking of, this is a good segue to talk about Grant's book and what he and I have been talking about. One of the lectures they asked me to do in Islamabad was on popular fiction. And so I spent a couple of months researching and so forth. And, they always want the lectures to be 40 minutes, which is a really long lecture. So it takes a long time and I cover a lot of material. But one of the things that I looked at was, popular fiction is both just a descriptive term. It's fiction that's popular. It's being widely read. It's on bestseller lists. That kind of thing, obviously. But it's also a genre. It's a style of writing, popular fiction. And what I guess it's commonsensical, but it took me 2 months of research to reach this common sense conclusion that in order to be descriptively popular, you really have to write popular fiction. And, we've talked about this before, that nowadays, I think a lot of authors have to decide, are they fish or fowl? Are they writing for a wide audience with wide appeal, or are they writing for a more literary, artsy kind of audience, knowing that not as many people are going to be interested in that? There was a time when there was some overlap, in the 20th century. But nowadays it's kind of one or the other. And anyway, this kind of leads to what we've been talking about, Grant and I, with A Shoe Shine Kill, because it's detective fiction, gumshoe detective fiction. It's just really cool plots. Hayden Fuller, former professional hockey player turned private eye, and most of the stories are set in Toronto. Fourth Face is in Montreal, but Toronto otherwise in the 60s and 70s. And just really interesting, criminals and just all kinds of interesting stuff going on. But at the same time, they haven't taken off as I would hope they would, and as we all would hope they would. And I don't know why that is, but I do know that at the same time, Grant, who comes from a literary background, has been using a lot of sort of literary techniques in the writing of them, and kind of postmodern techniques, and in particular, using indirect dialogue, which is actually direct dialogue. In other words, so you'll have these scenes where part of it's a conversation, but part of it's in quotation marks and part of it isn't. And what I was finding when I was kind of proofreading the final version here, even though I know that's what's going on, that I would find myself reading a scene And my brain would be thinking, oh, this is all internal monologue. Hayden is thinking this during this scene. And then I would get to the bottom of the page and somebody would respond to their Hayden's. So, oh, wait. That wasn't internal monologue. That he actually was saying that. It just isn't in quotation marks. And I'd have to kind of recalibrate and go back and reread the scene, think, okay, oh, this is conversation. And I just don't think most people who are attracted to mysteries want that to be part of the mystery. I mean, I love it artistically, and I really respect what Grant is doing there. But given the aim, the target audience and their expectation, I don't know that those things are meshing very well. So that's what he and I have been talking about. We're kind of in the process of making the punctuation a little more standard. So let me stop yapping and let me turn it over to Grant and get kind of your perspective on what we've talked about and how you feel about it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I at first I was a little bit taken aback, to be honest, and I was like, oh, but that's my vision, that's my voice. But then I went back to Neon Kiss and I realized I wasn't doing it as much. So I I think I got, in fairness, I to myself, and full disclosure, I think I started getting a little too wrapped up in my signature. And I know I'm sound like a French critic, but anyway, and I love the French, by the way. They discovered Howard Hawks and jazz and Jimi Hendrix, and Jerry Lewis. They're great. Anyway, um, and I noticed overabundance of M dashes in the most recent book, and I went back over Neon Kiss, and there's like maybe 15% M dashes compared to, like, every line of dialogue I put an M dash in. And I noticed less free and direct discourse in Neon Kiss. So I think I started leaning a little too much into style at the expense of story. And I want to have a smattering of those moments of uncertainty for the reader, because I really think that's part of what the mystery genre is about. I mean, David Bordwell just recently wrote a great film book on noir, and he says that's sort of a hallmark of the genre. Um, and since I'm writing crime noir, I want to give that vibe, but I don't want to overburden them. I want truck drivers. I mean, I no disrespect here, and I'm not trying to do a stereotype, but I remember the Blasters saying about their music, when they knew a truck driver was listening to the demo tape and loved it, they knew they had something. And that's part of the audience I want to be reaching, not just the literati. So I never really thought I was trying to write for the literati, but I after you pointed it out and I went back over Shoeshine, I saw that there was just a lot of artistic flourishes that it doesn't need. I want to control that, harness it, but still have some of that. I just don't want to. It's like on steroids.
Right.
In the later.
Well, and I mentioned to you that my wife, who's a really good reader, she was reading it and she thought it was just riddled with errors. She thought it was just really poorly edited, because she was, I think that's something to consider. We always try to have some teachable moments in our episodes. A lot of writers you don't have to use standard quotation marks, et cetera, et cetera. And some writers, obviously Joyce, for example, use like M dashes to introduce the quotes, no quotation marks. William Gass, most of his stuff doesn't use quotation marks. It's just, there's clearly dialogue, but you can tell because it's he said, she said, et cetera, et cetera. And like in these Mary Shelley sonnets, I am quoting from time to time from her letters and from the novels and blah, 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 blah. But I decided early on that I would just italicize the direct quotes and not use quotation marks. So I think readers, even the truck driving readers, they can figure out, okay, this is what's happening here. This is what this author is doing in this book or this story or this poem. And they can just go with it. But I think with what you were up to, which again I totally respect as a an artistic move, and as I told you, I will be happily and proudly publish the book in whatever form you want. It's your book, and you're the artist behind it. But I think that because you're shifting, sometimes using quotes, sometimes not, and you do throw in some italics and quotes at times, that it's hard to get one's bearings, and then that distracts from the really, really cool plot that's going on, and as I told you in our conversation that we had about it, as a librarian, I literally am picturing like the readers who ought to love this series because they're Gumshoe Detective fans and they read all the kind of authors that you're interested in. But I also know that 20 pages into it, they would just like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. they don't want to work that hard, to read a book, and so it's tricky. It's tricky to know where that medium ground is. And Brady's been silent for a while. Let me get your thoughts on, I don't know, accessibility, where does that line between popular fiction and literary fiction? Is there a definitive line, or how do you think about that?
Wow. Okay. How long is our podcast today? This for me, this is going to be a summer of Bob Dylan. Barry and I are going to the Dylan 2025 conference in July in Tulsa, and we're promoting our book, Teaching Bob Dylan. And we're on a round table, and I'm also giving, apart from the round table, I'm giving a paper on Murder Most Foul. And so I think Dylan's one of those maybe really rare writers, musicians, performers, minds that is both immensely popular and incredibly sophisticated and doing different things. And I don't know how he ever got away with it all, right? Like he somehow touched the popular imagination in really profound ways, but then still just kind of has always done what he wanted. And I really, really respect that. And then so in our Gothic class that I just finished this semester, was so much fun. We read the Brontes, we read Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, but we also read Dracula. And so we actually talked about the difference between what's literary fiction, what's popular fiction. And a lot of it has to do with how much pressure you can put on, at least in the course of our conversations, how much pressure you can put on the reader. And Dracula doesn't put the same pressure on the reader that Wuthering Heights, for example. Jane Eyre is a little bit more in the middle. So I guess as someone who enjoys a writer putting a lot of pressure on me as a reader, I would say to Grant, don't do it. But then I understand. And we have had this conversation, and I think that Ted, you and Grant should both be rich, and then you should invite me to come visit you occasionally on the basis of the Hayden Fuller mysteries. I think those are bestsellers that have yet to be discovered. And so I think this next book is, this has got to be the one, right? The 72 series. This has got to be the one.
Well, my plan all along has been to kind of blanket Canada, especially, with copies of the book to send it to various folks. But again, I'm very, very hesitant about sending like the version that I think challenges readers more than most readers want to be challenged. We had just read, Grant and I had the conversation just a couple of days after we'd had our last taping of our podcast, and we had read Ashley Wurzbacher's story Vivarium. And one of the things that Grant in particular talked about was how just beautifully and clearly written it was. And so I don't think there's a inherent disconnect between clarity and artistry. So in my mind, the Hayden Fuller series and A Shoeshine Kill in particular is great as just a story with a really sophisticated plot in terms of there's all this cast of characters and who done it, and you don't know until the very end, and all these really interesting eccentric figures, and now Hayden's a family man, and so there's all this stuff about his marriage and his being a father to this little girl, and to me there's all this really interesting stuff going on inherently. It doesn't have to be complicated by making the form of the book complicated. And so that's kind of where I'm at. So I want to blanket, Canada with this book, but I'm afraid that a lot of readers wouldn't necessarily get into it as they should. Again, especially the genre, because it's not normally meant to be a particularly literary genre. Obviously, it's got literary aspects and those kind of things. So anyway, I appreciate Grant being open-minded about this, and I to be honest with you, I've been thinking about this for a couple of months. It wasn't brave enough to actually broach the subject, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad we had that conversation. So anyway, that's
Yeah,
what we're working on.
I mean, like Raymond Chandler's my favorite author, and Long Goodbye is probably considered his most literary novel, his best novel. But I'm going to be honest with you, my favorite novel is Farewell, My Lovely, followed by The Big Sleep, and then Long Goodbye is number 3, and then Little Sister is number 4, out of the 7. So I hear where you're coming from. And, I've always loved Farewell, My Lovely. To me, it's a reworking of Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. But yeah, so you can tell Chandler's always got those literary touch, and he's just a cut above all the other people writing detective fiction. I mean, Hammett is a great writer, has great stories, but Chandler's a great stylist, and writes great stories. Hammett's got his style. I'm not saying throwing Hammett under the bus, but he's just, to me, not in the same league as Chandler for language. I like the romanticism that's in Chandler's work. So that's my own personal aesthetic, I guess. I like the toughness of Hammett. And Red Harvest is my favorite Hammett novel. But I'm crazy for Chandler, I guess is what I would say.
All right. Well, yeah, it's an interesting conversation. There's a lot more we could say about, popular fiction versus not, et cetera. But looking at the old clock on the computer here, we probably need to turn our attention to our featured story. As our regular viewers and listeners know, each episode we have a featured story. And this is one I really like. I hope you do too. Grant, you kind of mentioned earlier that you did, so I'm hoping that's the case. But this is out of a Michigan Quarterly Review. We did another MQR story pretty recently, but it just so happened the spring 2025 issue landed in my mailbox just a couple of days after our last recording. And so I needed to send you guys something. So I sent you out of this book. And then meanwhile, I've got like 3 other literary journals that have some great stories. So we got plenty of stuff for the summer. We got plenty of stories to choose from. So this is a story titled Marla and Ben, and Anansi and Tiger. And it's by, I hope I'm saying this name right, and I looked it up, so I think I'm at least close, Subraj Singh. And there's kind of how it looks on the page. And I'll say more about Subraj Singh, but he's a Guyanese writer, and the main character here is from Guyana. And so let me read a little bit from the beginning, and then touch on kind of what's going on here, and see what you all have to say about Marla and Ben and Anansi and Tiger. Before things escalated, and he vomited a live cat onto the dining room floor before the honeymoon, and before they left for England for the wedding, Marla was in love with Ben. As the wedding day loomed closer and closer, so close that it became a shadow stretching itself octopus-like along the walls of any room they were in together, a rift cut itself deep into the space that linked Marla and Ben to each other. That's one more little paragraph. She first became aware of it the night they were watching the Bollywood film, when she looked at Ben sitting next to her on the sofa in their apartment, asked, "Are you ready for this?" All right, so we've got these 2 characters, Marla and Ben, and they are about to get married. But as the story progresses here, we quickly figure out that Marla is from a very poor family in Guyana, and Ben is from a very aristocratic family from England, and the wedding is going to be in England on his family estate. And so most of the story takes place during the time that they're in England. And immediately Marla feels, she's kind of constantly sick to her stomach because she's so nervous and feels like she's being watched and judged constantly. She assumes Ben's family doesn't like her because she's dark skinned and because she's poor and so forth. And throughout the story, then there's a lot of contrast between dark and light. Ben has blonde hair, very pasty pale, English kind of complexion, but there's just a lot of other references to darkness, blackness, white, lightness, etc. I guess I'll explain briefly the title Anansi and Tiger refers to it's a literary allusion about a Guyanese sort of folk tale that Marla thinks about. And a lot of the story kind of plays off of this illusion where she thinks of herself as Anansi, the spider god, and Ben as the white tiger, who are adversaries in this folk tale. And there's a lot going on, but let me just stop there and see what you guys think of this story. And Brady, I haven't picked on you for a little bit, so let me kick it over to you. What were your reactions to this story in Michigan Quarterly Review?
Oh wow, it is a great story. It as a reader, it hit pretty hard, and there's a lot of discomfort, I would say, in this story that goes along with the physical changes, the thing. And I mean, as Ted, you read the first paragraph, the first lines, right from the get-go.
Yeah.
The story has your attention. I mean, I had to read it twice to make sure I'd read it properly. Right. Look, the first time you read it, what did I just read? Is this what's going on? And so we've seen this kind of story before, a wedding, young couple engaged. So there's this archetypal kind of story that we've seen. But this one brings in so much about colonialism and race and the way that Marla struggles to have some standing and some power and sense of peace in this relationship, where Ben, clearly comes from this family of predators. The three sisters, and even worse, the father, who's this totally menacing figure, at least in my reading of it. So yeah, it's a hard story to read. It's full of strife. It's full of grief. It's about poverty and exploitation. So yeah, a terrific story. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Great. Grant, what were some of your initial thoughts?
That it's magical realism, and it's true magical realism as far as I'm concerned, not to get all on a high horse, but I have a lot of students, American kids, white, who when they write magical realism, they lack the politicization, which I think is at heart of the form. And I love the colonial or post-colonial vibe that the story has, tapping into folklore, the spider versus the tiger, or the cat. She vomits up this spider, but she loves it. She takes care of it. She recognizes there's something about that for her that's meaningful, and it fits into the narrative. Like, she can navigate this a little bit better than he can, because when he vomits up the cat, it scratches them all up, and he's like, he has a totally different reaction. And then the stuff Brady was talking about, like the predatoriness of the family. I think there was some description about milk globs or something, and just the artifacts. And my novel After Shoe Shine Kill is called Artifacts, and it's about white people appropriating Native American culture. And in this, we've got machetes on the wall from certain cultures. I think some kind of tap. There's like three things I remember in the house, and I'm like, oh my God, these guys are just creeps. But that's the kind of political edge that I think magical realism should have, and a lot of the stuff from Central America, uh, those cultures does do that. But like I said, a lot of my students, when they do, they just get into a guy grows wings and now he's a bird or something, and it's like lacking all this other stuff. And so I was on the edge of my seat reading this and enjoying the blend of defamiliarization, storytelling, but this whole colonial thing that's going on running throughout the story. I thought it was great. And that opening, wow, it's like a flash forward. It kind of tells you that things are going to go south. And we're going to kind of like work our way back to that opening sentence. Like, so it's like sets things up and then we kind of move backwards in time and then we're moved. So I love the non-linear. It's got a kind of a linear line, but it starts off in a way that it's like a splash page in an old comic book where you have the fight on the cover and then it says, we'll get to this, true believers. And then you read the comic and then the fight's about halfway through, Vulture and Spider-Man or something. So it was a way to lure you in. And like Brady, I had to read it twice because I was like, am I reading this right? Vomited a cat, what? And then I'm like, yeah, cool. So anyway, I thought it was great.
Well, and
There's
go ahead, Brady. Go ahead.
Well, just to build very quickly, two things off of Grant's point. Somehow, I'm still naive in life, um, even though the story tells us right away with that opening image that how is this thing going to go. I was still kind of hoping for the two young people,
Yeah.
right? That's a real tension in the story. I think it's really well done because what's a wedding? There's some sort of grim humor throughout this story, and so the possibility of comedy of this thing might work out. I mean, I know it's not going to happen, but I still was hoping for it. And then the only other thing I'll say, and Ted doesn't know this, and I don't know if Grant has seen this. It just kind of depends on the camera angle. But behind Ted on the door is a spider in the
Wow.
grain. Have you
Yeah.
have you noticed that? Yeah, no, it's on the other side,
Other
not
side,
the
Ted.
handle side, the other side over your shoulder. It's since this story, I'm seeing things in patterns on wood grain, but it is definitely a spider. So careful there, bud.
Well,
Yeah.
that's
I
interesting because
just had one thing to what Brady was saying. I
sure, sure.
I just I totally agree with you, Brady. I think the characters are likable. I'm not saying writers have to write likable characters. I agree with Charles Baxter. They just have to be interesting. But both of these characters are likable because Marla is honest. She comes from this poor background, so this is uh, an opportunity for her, an economic opportunity, and she genuinely loves Ben. That seems very clear to me, which is quite wonderful. And then to come back to the colonial thing, of course, like her family can't even get a visa to come to the
Yeah,
wedding.
can't get the visa.
I know it's
Yeah.
terrible. And then on Ben's side, it's like he genuinely loves her, and there's this development where he was kind of this carefree, fun-loving guy. Um, and now he's getting serious. Part of it is the burden placed on him by his own family, but I think part of it is just the seriousness of getting marriage and the multicultural relationship that's going on. So I like both the characters. I mean, I have empathy for them, and I think that's partly why I'm with you on that. Is like I wanted it to work out, even though I knew we were headed. To, yeah. Anyway, but that's just my thought on the two characters. They're
Well, I want to say, and actually, I was going to mention this before Brady's comment, but his comment, especially about the spider behind me. The author does something which could be a little heavy-handed if not done by a more expert, or if done by a less expert hand. And what I mean by that is, so you got these two illusions. She's the spider god, related, associated character, and he's the white tiger character. And so there's all these things throughout the story, even before we understand what those illusions are to, describing things as a sort of spidery, like the octopus illusion, which is obviously kind of like a spider in terms of the arms. And then there's, tree limb that kind of spiders up towards, and then there's all kinds of other words associated with felines and cats. So throughout the story, there's all these little drops of description which are in line with these opposing, metaphors, the spider and the tiger. And again, it could be a little cheesy if not handled well and if not done sort of beautifully. But this author does, and so it works really, really well. The other thing I wanted to say was, even though this is a specific situation that not a lot of people are going to find themselves in, I mean, where you have a bride from a poor family in Guyana and a groom from a super rich, old money family in England. And so they come together, and she realizes that it's not a good idea. It's not a good match. She should get out of it, blah, 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 blah. But apparently is not going to, or doesn't really. We're told that. But I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think a lot of people, get engaged and they go through that whole process of setting a date and sending out invitations and getting the cake and spending $2,000 on a bridal gown. And the closer they get to the date, the more and more they realize this is not a good idea, but yet they don't have the, whatever, they feel obliged, socially pressured, family pressure to go through with it, and so they do, hoping maybe for the best, and we know oftentimes that's just an empty hope. So I think a lot of people can relate to that, sort of getting sucked down this path which they know is a bad idea, but they can't seem to find a way to extricate themselves from it. I think that's pretty familiar. And then the other thing I think a lot of people have some familiarity with, they met at college in America and fell in love and have this very solid, emotionally supportive relationship at college in America. But as soon as you transplant that relationship somewhere else, it just starts to fall apart. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, where they have a partner or have someone in their life and everything's going well, as long as they stay right here in this setting. But if they, change cities or go to around a different group of people, things just, fissures in the relationship start to become more and more obvious. And so I think even though the specifics of this story are quite unusual, I think a lot of readers could relate to those kinds of elements. And I think that's an important thing for any writer to consider, that, the setting, the characters can be unusual, but hopefully readers can relate to whatever conflict and emotions and so forth that they're experiencing. Brady, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, no, I agree. It's the wedding plot is one, what time honored, and the writer here just makes such great use of it. Yeah, and I like the way you describe it. In a particular place of innocence and opportunity, both of them out of their home countries, both of them on their own at the American college. I mean, this is sort of fundamental kind of storytelling, and so the writer, does it all very well. And one of the other things, and just listening to the conversation, one of the things that seems clear to me in this story is the experience a reader brings to a story. Who are you? Where are you from? What is your background? How do you identify? Might change the reading of this story in any numbers of way. And so it's richly complex. It's challenging. It's a tough story to read. As Grant says, we feel for this young couple. World, stop being awful.
Yeah.
let the young people be.
And I like the I don't want to just hammer the point about the politics, but see, that's a typical North American reaction, right? I mean, art, it's not supposed to be propaganda. It's supposed to tell a story, and then the ideology comes up. But I like how this is kind of ideologically heavy. Like, to me, that's what made it interesting. It had that element of allegory, had that element of like daring to have the message be up front. Like, recently had to read because a student did that thing you were talking about, Ted, earlier, where you build a story on the scaffolding of another story, and she was inspired by a South Korean story, um, it was her response to the South Korean story about a fridge and it keeps eating everything. And you put stuff in. It's a famous short story, um, and you keep putting stuff in the fridge, but it's a story that's responding to sort of excess consumerism, especially what happened historically in South Korea at a certain time in the 60s and beyond. Same thing kind of happened in Japan post World War II. This kind of consumer culture, taking over as they became modernized. And I I love the colonial aspect to the story, and I love the the sad message that it gives. It's kind of on Front Street with that. So I love stories that are daring, trying something outside the box, and this certainly did for me.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Go ahead, Brady.
well, just that, yeah. I think there's a certain number of people in certain states, so we say Florida, who who would not welcome this story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad, Ted, that you chose this, and um, that we have the opportunity to read and talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do want to give the writer's bio here, but before I do, there's just a lot of just beautiful turns of phrases, and this was one of my favorites. This is early on in the story, but they're at the wedding venue. It's the night before the wedding, and her family and friends are not there. It's all Ben's family and his friends, and the writer writes, and this is from Marla's. The whole thing is from Marla's POV, but he writes, people milled about unaware, chatting with each other, and smiling smiles that never reached their eyes whenever they happened to look at her. Oh my gosh, is that wonderful? So they're smiling at her, but it's their eyes are not smiling at her. And we all know what he's talking about, but I've
Yeah.
never heard that put in that particular way, but it's just perfect.
No, I love that line. I underlined it twice, Ted. Yeah, that one. That's the kind of. So I'm jumping in over top of you. I apologize, but just
No.
since I am, I read that sentence. It wasn't confusing or challenging in the way that the opening sentences were, but it was just so damn great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was such great writing.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. Yeah. Well, let me give the writer a little chops here. Michigan Quarterly Review does lengthy contributors' notes, although his isn't particularly lengthy, but they put them at the beginning of the journal. But Subraj Singh is a writer from Guyana. He has an MFA in creative writing fiction from the University of Maryland and is currently studying for his PhD in English at the University of Missouri. He was a Tin House Scholar and a Lambda Literary Fellow and is a Clarion West alum. His fiction has been published in Agni, New England Review, Gulf Coast, Granta in the meantime, and some other great journals. He recently won the Commonwealth Fiction Award, something like Short Story Award, which is a very prestigious award. And he doesn't seem to have a website that I can find, but he has a page at the University of Missouri faculty page as a PhD student, TA kind of thing. And then he's also on Instagram and Blue Sky. So I would definitely, I think he's a writer that's going a lot of great places. And there's at least one of his stories that's online. So you could check out his story online, even if you don't have access to the Michigan Quarterly Review. Oh, Southern Humanities Review. That's another one. It's one of their online featured stories at Southern Humanities Review. So check that out. Anyway, so yeah, we could go on and on and on talking about what a wonderful story this is. Time is probably getting a little long here for our viewers and listeners. So let me just kind of come back to see if you have any kind of final thoughts, either on the story or just on anything we talked about during this particular episode, etc. Grant, do you have any kind of final thoughts on either of those things or whatever else you'd like to say?
I guess the one thing I would say for writers out there, story can be what you want it to be. Like take some risks. And every semester when I teach creative writing, I tell students to, at least out of one of the three stories you put up for workshop, try to write something outside your comfort zone. that's like a response story to something else. If you're a dialogue heavy writer, try something that does more narrative telling. If you're a character that writes a lot of stories about women, maybe try one from a male point of view or a kid's point of view, or whatever. Like, just stretch as an artist. And so I love stuff that plays with the boundaries of what we think fiction is or can be. And I know this story's in a tradition. It's just not a tradition that I'm as hip with or up on. And so it was really exciting to me to see something that, as I said before, pushes the idea of ideas. I have a friend, Andy Farkas. He's a really good writer, and whenever people get talking about character, he just like, I don't do that. He's not a writer that writes character driven. He writes very postmodern stories that are fun and entertaining and playful and political, but he's not writing character driven. He's doing something else, and it's kind of a little bit Coover-esque, but it's fantastic. And we need space for that kind of stuff. So yeah, I love the story. I thought it was great, and I was in a foul mood because my Leafs lost, so that tells you how good this story is.
All right, thanks, Grant. Brady, what are some of your words of wisdom to leave with us?
Well, so a friend gave us a shout out on Facebook and said that most of the hockey talk was, reasonably interesting, whereas the book talk was all interesting. But I had to, rejoin that all the hockey talk is great on this podcast. And yeah, and I really felt for Grant. That was a hard game to watch. It was really pulling for Toronto this year.
Well, Edmonton
So
all the
yeah,
way, baby. Edmonton all the
yeah.
way. Let's go.
Dude, I mean, such a great team. Anyway,
Yeah.
Florida's just
Oh,
stomped them. Yeah. So, in response to the story, one of the things I've been thinking about in the course of our conversation, but also just the in thinking about where we three are at, it's really nice in the case of Subra to see a young gun, doing so well, right? Like this. This is the beginning of a great career. Um, Knock on wood. But then it's so much fun for us, is it not? To be able to have our opportunity to work on our stories and sonnets and films. And so I guess my parting words on this, it doesn't matter how old you are or who you are. If you have the chance, if you're lucky, then you get to try to tell your stories. So do so.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, well, I'm gonna leave it on that really cool last note, and we'll be back together in a month or so. I'm headed to Killarney, Ireland, mid-June for the international conference on the short story in English. Went to the conference 2 years ago in Singapore, and now I'm going to Killarney. So we'll have to schedule around that somehow. But I should have a lot of interesting takeaways from that conference as I did the last time I went a couple of years ago. All right. So thanks, guys, and thanks, listeners and viewers. We'll be back together in a few weeks here with some more writing related stuff. And so take care.
I'm not hearing.